Alright everyone, it was funny yesterday, and I'll be doing my BitChute exclusive today on that subject, which is that Bernie Sanders made his press conference, a day late and sort of shrugged his way through his speech and failed to address the fact that he just lost, that he got his ass handed to him. He failed to address the fact that he's clearly not going to win because he wants more donations. He wants more money to basically embezzle from U.S. voters who, some of them, they still think that he can do it. And I don't know exactly what they're smoking, but I know they're smoking something at some point. Anyway, I wanted to talk about the anti-socialist juggernaut saving the Dems right now. Now, this is a total double-edged sword, and here's why. For some months I've pointed this out. The best thing that can happen to the Democrats is they get completely curb-stomped in the election. They flounder, they founder, Tom Perez is kicked aside, and Nancy Pelosi and all their other non-leadership because all these people suck. Nancy Pelosi has all the optics of a wet sponge. Tom Perez is basically a steward leader for the DNC. He's an absentee. He barely does anything. He sits there as acting DNC chair, and he doesn't really do anything else. He simply exists. You have people like Hillary Clinton, and then you have people like Joe Biden, and these are the leaders of the Democratic Party. They're not so very efficient after all. The best thing that can happen is that you lose the election, and I would say this to the Democrats. In the general, you should definitely not go out and vote, and you should punish your party, and I'll tell you why. The bigger margin you lose by, the more likely the old leadership of the Dems that's clearly not doing well gets ousted. The party then has to rebuild. It has to build a new consensus sort of form. It'll inevitably be more stable than it was before. Just by design, the party will be more stable and more able to maneuver and strategize. Even if it starts off with a detriment to the overall bloc, the overall core number of voters able to take part in that process, because you probably alienate the far left in the process, let's face it. Because it is more stable, because it's more reasoned, it's able to operate more efficiently and therefore can outmaneuver the Republicans. It will simply have to change form. You're going to have to give up some of the wedge issues. You're going to have to give up some of the pandering. It's just the way it is. You're going to need like a JFK reformation in the Dems. Then you will be able to win again. This is what happened with the Republicans. The Republican leadership goddamn sucked. They alienated Ron Paul. And you can think what you will about the Ron Paul revolution stuff. It was highly effective at driving youth turnout. It was highly effective at courting independent voters. It was highly meme-worthy in a time when the internet was taking more and more of a chunk out of cable and radio and things like that and becoming more prominent in the political role. They shafted him. They changed their convention rules to shaft him. They fucked themselves. Mitt Romney arguably would have won the 2012 election had the party not operated poorly. Trump has come along and usurped things. He's sweeping aside the old leadership in favor of a new ethos, a new principle. It's more expansive than before. It is more independent friendly. If the legacy media were reporting on the Trump presidency accurately, if they set aside their enormous bias and actually talked about things the way they really are, economically, socially, whatever, he would be getting glowing praise. Virtually every independent bloc would overwhelmingly swing Republican, and the Democrats would be looking at an election that they would be completely unwinnable. Now, I think, of course, that Joe Biden can't win anyway because he's demented. I also think Bernie would lose. In a perfect world, Bernie would be the nominee, because the far left element of the party then would take the blame for their almost inevitable loss, and it would get kicked aside along with Perez and the other failed leadership, and a new business Democrat party would loom up from the shadows, rise up from the ashes, and reform things. Oddly enough, therefore, the anti-socialist voters, including a lot of independents, don't get me wrong, a lot of people are taking a Dem ballot that aren't Democrats fundamentally in the open primary states. We see the discrepancy between the two, closed and open, in voting totals. These people are preventing the ruination of the Democrats. I still predict their loss in 2020. I think Trump gets reelected fairly easily. But it won't be, I think, monumental enough loss. I think it's literally going to come down to whoever comes after Trump destroying the Democrats for a third election in a row before they're going to get the hint. Oddly enough, it saves them temporarily. It allows them to save face because the face of the party will be a boring neoliberal. Well, the problem is the leadership you need to kick aside is already part of that club. There's also a far left bloc within the party that represents a low turnout but high enthusiasm crowd of very young voters that you'd think would be natural Democrats, but the problem is that you've gone so far left and promised them so many things that temporarily you're going to have to put the brakes on that wedge issue pandering and that snake oil peddling, or else you will literally destroy the Democrats because every other voting bloc in the party will abandon you. What happened is that the Democrats decided that in order to get 18 and 19-year-olds to come into the party, they decided to alienate everyone over 50. That's not a great strategy. It's never going to actually work because of the difference in the turnout between these two groups of people. The anti-socialist juggernaut is, by the way, what's stopping Sanders. Bernie Sanders is the reason, like Mitchell pointed it out the other day, and other people have been talking about this. Well, how is it? You have such enthusiasm in the polls, everything beforehand, you've got a huge enthusiasm gap. Why isn't it materializing on voting day? Why is it that when people actually go to the polls, Bernie Sanders' seeming lead, in many respects, disappears completely and he gets cocksmacked over and over? It happened on Super Tuesday, it happened the other day, it'll happen, I think, again on the 17th. By the way, if that discrepancy shows up in Florida, he might lose by 50 points in Florida. He could end up getting robbed of any delegates there. At that point, by the way, the race is over. That would be the official death knell of Bernie Sanders' revolutionary shtick, his economic snake oil, his economic Scientology, as I like to call it. It makes even less sense than voodoo economics. At least those have an underpinning that on paper seems to make sense. By the way, there's no such thing as trickle-down. That's a pejorative that was invented by the Democrats. It's still oddly enough on Wikipedia. I thought the pejoratives of that nature weren't allowed. Like, I think they removed cultural Marxism and put it under a conspiracy header, if I remember correctly. They're an unbiased source of information, though, of course. Anyway, what's happening is that people are expressing in public. Bernie Sanders has a lot more charismatic followers. They're much more engaged. But when you actually get into the privacy of the ballot box, even some of those people, I think, are at the last moment saying, I don't know about this socialism stuff, because I'm hearing all sorts of concerns about how we're going to pay for it. Some of the more pragmatic people, I think, are voting against it. And then you also have high turnout and enthusiasm against Bernie Sanders. Every other group, business Dems, the independents that are taking a Dem ballot and so forth, they are pushing back against what they see, I think, as an increasingly fanatic Democratic Party. They don't want the Democrats run by a fanatic. By the way, neither do I, and here's why. A lot of people think I'm some Trump superfan, GOP member for life conservative. I'm not. I'm a libertarian. I'm an independent voter. I voted for Trump largely for fiscal reasons and because Hillary Clinton rambled about war with Iran. I'll vote for him again because the only alternatives are socialism or a dude with dementia. It's not going to happen. The Democrats simply need a better way in which to operate. They need to purge the far left from the party, make sure to tell them we're not a socialist movement. If you want to have one, make your own fucking party. Force them out, and the Democrats overall will actually gain more voters because those center-left voting blocs that I guarantee you are going to give you backlash against the party if Bernie Sanders is even remotely a surrogate for Joe Biden, as unfortunately the Dems will be forced to do in order to keep the youth voters aboard. It will alienate millions and millions of independent voters. Socialism's not popular, except among voting blocs that don't go to the polls. Some 18-year-old kid is the least likely person to go to the polls. They're the most likely to make a post on Twitter. They're the most likely to hold up a sign. They're the most likely to go door-to-door knocking, but they're the least likely at the end of the day to actually show up. They're too busy doing something else. They're gaming or they're going to work or something. Some 70-year-old is not going to knock on doors for you. They're not going to make Twitter posts for you most of the time, but they will show up to vote because they have a civic mind. Because, you know, back in their day, we taught civics in school and told them, hey, by the way, it is important for people to participate in the process of democracy. We don't teach that anymore. Millennials and Gen Z have not been taught civics in school. Only a small proportion of them took senior law, got a basic broad overview of the civic process, and that's really it. We leave it up to them going to college in order for them to learn anything about the civic structure. Yes, I wonder why there's a problem with people not understanding the Constitution. When somebody who was in a hippie commune is the one teaching them about the structure of government, I think you might have problems. Anyway, Bernie Sanders isn't going to win. His revolution's basically over. If the polling remains the same in places like Florida and Arizona, Bernie Sanders is done on the 17th. This debate that's coming up, I guess, or maybe they're going to suspend it, probably means nothing. You can look for the possibility of Warren endorsing Biden right before the 17th and giving Bernie one final cock smack. And at that point, his revolution dies. That's about all. Peace out.